Hello, I am Dr. Leisa Easom of the Rosalind Carter Institute for Caregiving, and today I'm going to share with you about an evidence-based caregiver support intervention called Operation Family Caregiver, and otherwise we call it OFC for short. So today, during our time together, we will review the need and the historical background of Operation Family Caregiver. We will discuss the development of OFC. I will give you a snapshot overview of what the program is like and the outcomes. We'll actually discuss how OFC works. We'll review intervention content and practices, and we will cover what we teach our OFC coaches so that you will have a thorough understanding of how this intervention works. Let me share with you, sometimes to understand how a program works, you need to hear from the voice of someone who's living it. And let me read to you from a caregiver's spouse whose husband went into war, into one of the recent wars. And she writes, "At 28 years old, I am frustrated, I am lonely, I am overwhelmed. My husband Jason came home from his third deployment with traumatic brain injury, post-traumatic stress disorder. He also had knee, back, and shoulder injuries. He suffers from migraine headaches, a hernia, acid reflux, sleeplessness, and depression. He has not been able to find a job since he was honorably discharged from the Army and returned home last year. This has made him become even more withdrawn. Some days it feels like I am living with a roommate rather than being part of a marriage. I sent a whole, healthy, strong man to war, and they returned a broken shell of a man to me. I now care for him as well as my 3 children ages 3 to 6 years old. My youngest child has autism, and his needs require most of the energy and the extra time I have. My family and friends all mean well, but their advice is not always helpful. They have a difficult time understanding my husband's behavior. I feel so isolated from everyone at times. It's a very lonely journey. It's like having another child, a disturbed child on top of that. Negotiating the Veterans Benefits System has been exhausting and confusing. I have been told something different at 4 different Veterans Administration clinics. I spend a lot of time chasing information for assistance and being denied assistance from places that I thought would help. I feel like I'm a single parent most days. For the family, though, I need a second adult in the house to be an example, to be a disciplinarian, to give kisses and hugs, to be an extra set of hands, and to help make decisions. At times, things really feel hopeless. I need some help. Some help in my community that provides easier access, not help I must travel and dig for to receive. I need some help." So now you've heard from the caregiver. Listen now to the voice of a soldier who's returned from deployment and what he says. This is from Vic Bertrand, he was a wounded warrior, and he attended at a conference, and these were his words. "When these guys and gals deploy, they come back home with post-traumatic stress disorder, traumatic brain injury, whatever the issue may be," he said. "A lot of the spouses I've talked to have all said the same thing. They do not know how to deal with their husbands or their wives when they return. Their families, whether it's their wife, their husband, or their children, suffer because they are not prepared for that change. Yes, they do get a nice little brief from the family readiness group that tells them that your husband or your wife is going to come back changed, but they aren't giving the tools or the resources for when I did not sleep, for when I woke up from the nightmares and I was punching her in her sleep because I didn't know where I was or what I was doing." I think this helps to make it real to us. Let's take a look at the historical background even again and the need for this wonderful program, Operation Family Caregiver. More than 2.5 million men and women have been deployed. 320,000 of them were estimated now to have a traumatic brain injury. More than 50,000 were wounded. 400,000 are estimated to have post-traumatic stress, and these are young people. Nearly 2/3 of these men and women went to war before their 29th birthday. Of those who do return home, many need care. 80% have a disability that limits mobility. 64% suffer from mental health or substance abuse problems such as alcohol and drugs. 35% have chronic conditions such as diabetes, cancer, or heart disease. And 20% have a traumatic brain injury. So who takes care of these men and women who have served their country well? There are 1.1 million post-9/11 recent war military caregivers. 33% are spousal caregivers. 25% are parents. As you remember, many went to war before their 29th birthday, and many were not married, so that when they did return home, their parents are their caregivers. 23% are friends and neighbors who care for these military people that have come in. And 19% are others. It might be a battle buddy or somebody else. 61% of these caregivers, they're not just being a caregiver. They're also employed outside the home. 40% suffer from depression. That is 4 times the national average for depression. 40% lack health care coverage. 28% gave up their job to provide care for their loved one. And 11% took early retirement due to caregiving. Therefore, they're giving up income and retirement benefits. Operation Family Caregiver is an evidence-based program. In other words, this intervention originated in a randomized control trial. One of the many control trials that were run, this is an example on your screen, was problem-solving training for family caregivers of persons with traumatic brain injuries, a randomized control trial. There were numerous other publications as well. As you can see here on the screen, there's one on focus, which is the model approach we use when we are looking at problem solving. There are several other of the problem-solving training intervention, which OFC is, but done with different populations. So I think you can see that there is evidence that shows that caregivers who are good at problem solving are less likely to develop depression, anxiety, and poor health in their first year of caring for a family member. We have evidence that those who have strong problem-solving skills are better at regulating their emotions, staying positive about their ability to cope, and are better able to be realistic about what they can and cannot do. Our nation's military families deserve to have access to programs that are proven to work. They deserve evidence-based programs. Operation Family Caregiver as a snapshot. It is an in-home tailored caregiver support intervention that involves 4 in-home visits, face-to-face or via Skype. There's a large stigma many times about accessing help when you're dealing with a mental health issue such as post-traumatic stress. So some families feel less threatened when they can do it and engage with a caregiver coach by Skype on the computer. Others feel the need to meet in person. This particular intervention is delivered in both ways. It is non-clinical. It involves supportive coaching. There is, in addition to the home visits or the face-to-face visits, there are monthly telephone availability. We do what we call a pre and post research design. In other words, we collect data at the very beginning of the program and also at which we call the baseline, and then also at program end. Overall, the program length is over 4 to 6 months. We know that behavioral change takes time, and so we need time to practice these new problem-solving skills and coping skills with these families. And we consider that somebody that has completed 75% of the sessions to be considered a completer, and they are included in our data set. So what kind of outcomes are we seeing? Preliminary outcomes indicate that caregivers are reporting that they feel like they have decreased burden, that their stress is decreased, that they feel an increase in their positive problem-solving skills, that their depression is decreased, they have less or fewer health complaints, and they feel more encouraged, and they have an increased satisfaction of life. All of these things enable them to sustain the caregiver role, remain in their very valuable role, and stay with their loved ones providing care. I thought you might want to see how it looks across the United States with our current Operation Family Caregiver implementation. Although there are no geographic boundaries, because we can deliver this intervention via Skype, many people would like to have physical locations, and currently we have 12 locations now delivering this intervention. As we mapped out where to place these intervention organizations that are carrying out this program, we looked and measured the top 10 states that had the highest density of populations with military families. So what do OFC coaches do? Well, many of them live in organizations or they work with organizations in the community already. And these coaches will deliver one-on-one support either in the caregiver's home or via Skype. They provide a customized 16 to 24-week program that is unique to each family. And together with the caregivers, they plan with the caregivers, not for the caregivers. They develop strategies that can help them get through the tough times and help them to make plans on how to manage what's coming up in the future and over the long term. So what is Operation Family Caregiver? It coaches the families and friends of newly returning service members and veterans to manage difficult transitions. And how does it work? The OFC coaches, they work one-on-one with those caregivers, and they develop a plan that is tailored to each caregiver family needs. It's much further than just basic education, and it aims to have behavioral change. Together, your caregivers and their OFC coaches develop these strategies that help them get through the tough times and not only face the challenges of today, but prepare them for the challenges of tomorrow. So as you can see on your overhead slide, the caregiver reaches out for help, then the caregiver connects with an OFC coach, the caregiver and the coach develop a plan, the caregiver develops and practices new skills, and then the caregiver, the family, and the entire community grow stronger. And what kind of results are we seeing? We are definitely seeing a decrease in depression, fewer health complaints, and an increase in satisfaction with lives. We know that this is helping to build stronger families that can cope better with the challenges that they face every day. Overall, upon participating in the program, caregivers are more satisfied with their lives, they feel better prepared to take care of their families, and they report fewer health complaints. So in a snapshot, it is an evidence-based, proven effective program, unique to every caregiver family, and it's delivered anywhere by Skype or FaceTime, and it does result in minimized stigma. And now I'm going to let you hear from one of the graduates of the OFC program. So let's take a look at this video together.
Today, millions of families, friends, and others are caring for military service members and veterans who bravely fought for our nation, yet bear the lasting visible and invisible wounds of war.
When John was deployed to Fallujah, Iraq, he was exposed to many blasts. He didn't catch any shrapnel. He never bled. So he came home uninjured, so we thought. And a few months after he returned home, he was very quickly diagnosed with PTSD. And so then he was hospitalized, and with that hospitalization came the diagnosis of TBI, which we had never heard of TBI. I never know how my day-to-day life is going to be. I never know. I am always anticipating a seizure. I'm always anticipating an outburst. And I met with my caregiver coach, and what she helped me do is we went and she said, what is the thing that is stressing you the most? And she helped me break that down. Shortly after I graduated the program, I have 2-year-old twins, and one of my twins was diagnosed with autism. And what my caregiver coach taught me, I have been able to apply that to this issue with my son. And so it has benefited me greatly in my life.
Operation Family Caregiver helps families of our returning service members and veterans learn to manage all the new challenges they face, ensuring resilient and healthy military families.
So as we review, some key components of the program are assessments and strengths and challenges. We utilize the focus approach when we are working on our problem-solving skills. We added to this program self-care, safety, and suicide awareness and prevention. Overall, other key components include ongoing motivation and encouragement and support. We produced a military caregiver guide, which you can see here, because this guide is a very important resource to our families. It stays in the home with the families. At this point, I think, we'll go through each week to help you have a better understanding of how we carry out this program and how it empowers and encourages these families and help them to cope. So let's look at some of the more intense aspects of the program. You remember that we talk about maintaining fidelity to an intervention is critical when you're carrying out an evidence-based program. With fidelity, it means that you need to adhere to the protocols that were a part of the original randomized control. Let's talk about some of those. So if you map out the visit so you can see an overview, remember this, it goes over 4 to 6 months. In week 1, we have initial data collection session. This is done by home or by Skype. And the coach gives a URL address for the computer to the family caregiver, and they go on and they enter and talk about all of their information that they collect. It might be demographics. It asks them questions about depression and burden, stress. These kinds of this kind of information is collected. In weeks 2 to 4, we have a home and Skype visit with an intervention focus. Week 5 to 7, they have a telephone call follow-up, followed by the next week, it's a visit in the home or a Skype visit. Anyway, it's face-to-face. 11 and 12, a telephone follow-up. 13 to 15 weeks, it's a home Skype visit. Week 16 to 18, it's a telephone call follow-up. And week 19 to 24, they have the final data collection. They go back in, all data collection is computerized. They go back in, they're given the URL for assessment 2. They go in, they enter their data, and then it's all is collected for later so that we can analyze that data and measure the impact of the program. As you remember with evidence-based programs, you then gather your information, you analyze the data, and you compare it back to the original randomized control trial, and you should receive similar or the same findings. Now let's look at this a little more closely, maybe week by week. I think that will help you to understand it. So in week 1, like we said, we have online data collection. They go in, we give them the URL address. The coaches are available in case the caregiver has questions on how to answer something, or maybe they're not sure about how to progress in the online data collection. But most of them find it pretty easy. So that's week 1. In week 2 to 4, the first week is followed by a home or a Skype visit. In other words, it is a face-to-face opportunity with the caregiver coach. In this time, the coach works to motivate the caregiver. They introduce the caregiver guide that I showed with you earlier. They talk to the caregiver about where to place this guide in the home. They want it in an easy location that they know where it is. They want them to keep it in the same place. So each time they get together, they can talk about the things in the book and the resources available to that family. At this time, during this first home visit, they review the focus model. They discuss positive and negative thinking. They ask the caregiver, what do they think the primary problem is, or what are they struggling the most with? They talk about generating alternatives, and they decide on a solution. We'll talk more about that. So I've shown you this is our family military caregiver guide. Problem solving is when you sit and you brainstorm. But you know, the caregiver coach is encouraging that participant, that family caregiver, to think about it. I think I can, I think I can, I think I can. It's positive thinking. So they encourage them to brainstorm about all kinds of possibilities, even possibilities that they don't think will be realistic to carry out to some extent, but to be at least be open to change. The theoretical basis for Operation Family Caregiver can be found in the Stress Health Process Model. And you know, with this, and the care recipient has problem behaviors, physical and social environment is examined, and then the caregiver and the care recipient in this process looks at and appraises what are the demands on my family. What is my capacity to adapt to these changes? And as those changes are realized, what kind of stress am I going through? What is the perceived stress, and how do I respond to that stress? Well, all of that goes on. That's the stress health process model has been in existence for a long time. But what Operation Family Caregiver does, it impacts the caregiver's stress by providing information, by providing strategies and tools for problem solving, by encouraging that family caregiver, and by providing hope that things can be better, or the way that we look at our life can be different. The problem solving in the civilian world can be approached through a model that we call FOCUS. FOCUS is an acronym that stands for facts. O stands for optimistic or orientation. C stands for creativity. U stands for understanding. And S stands for solve. So let's take a look at each of these. And with FOCUS, there are 5 components of the FOCUS problem-solving technique, and they should be used as a continual and interlinking process. The caregiver coach will determine which component is the best starting point for the caregiver and which component should be emphasized. You remember that the caregiver goes in at baseline and does their data analysis, their data assessment. They do the data assessment before they begin the work with the caregiver coach. So we tell our coaches, go in and look to see what they're dealing with, so you understand the reality of the situation of the caregiver. And we know that there's not always one solution to every problem. There are usually multiple solutions. Sometimes identifying one specific problem is the first step. Getting the facts of that problem is the second. because many times people can't see the trees because they're so overwhelmed by the forest. So let's talk about facts first. With facts, we want to identify the caregiver's most pressing problem according to the caregiver. We need to brainstorm who, what, when, where, and how. Facts should be in very clear, concrete terms, and facts should be separated from assumptions. Irrelevant facts need to be separated from relevant facts. The caregiver coach encourages the caregiver to seek expert sources of information that they don't have. That does not mean that they need to go on the internet and do a Google search, because all the sources that you find on the internet may not be true. You need to be careful. The coach helps them to set specific goals, but they also encourage them to set realistic goals rather than perfect goals. And as you can see in this slide, you've got a kitten that's looking into the mirror and they see a lion. That's not very realistic. They need to see what the reality, what is really there. So we've talked about the F as an acronym for facts. Let's talk about O. O stands for optimistic or orientation. Here, the caregiver coach assists the caregiver in developing a sense of optimism regarding their ability to problem solve. We want the caregiver to feel empowered, that yes, you remember the slide we had that says, I think I can, I think I can, I think I can. They want to acknowledge what they have already accomplished in their caregiving role, and then they will move forward from that. They will discuss previous successes in problem solving with that caregiver. With optimism, the coaches do not allow the caregiver to choose goals that are not realistic or that depend on someone else to make them happen. They remind the caregiver that they can control only their own behavior, and they need to focus on things that they can change or perhaps choose to view differently. So they encourage them, but keep it real. And as we know, there are many solutions to a problem, and there are many approaches, and all those should be brainstormed, which is what you see in this slide. With orientation, we talk about that caregivers approach problems from two different extremes. One is an impulsive. They react immediately and impulsive, and they attack. Or caregivers may approach the problem from the other extreme, which is avoidance. One of our tools that we use, and we have a number of reliable and valid instruments or tools that we use to measure the caregiver components. One is called the problem-solving scale, and it does measure the orientation to which the caregiver approaches problems either as an impulsive or an avoidance behavior. Impulsive problem solvers, many times just because they want to get a quick fix, it often results in careless mistakes. So caregivers are encouraged to stop and take time to analyze the problem, to tolerate discomfort when solutions are not immediate, to withhold judgment until the whole problem-solving process is complete. So we tell them, stop and calm down, think of a plan, and let's problem solve wisely. The caregiver coach asks the caregiver to generate a list of the areas in which they experience problems. And then they create a second list of specific problems. Sometimes just writing it out is very helpful. This is the other extreme. This is the avoidance. Sticking your head in the sand and avoiding the problem never solves the issue. There are some emotional cues that there's an underlying unrecognized problem. So if there is anger that is expressed or felt by the caregiver, or sadness, frustration, or irritability, these are cues that tell us that there is something wrong here. Many of our coaches have their caregivers perform what's called a red flag exercise. So the caregiver coach and the caregiver generate a list of feelings that may serve as cues that there is a problem. And the caregiver is encouraged to stop and think when these emotions are detected to identify problems that may be triggering the emotions. And what the caregiver coaches have found when they make this list and generate it, that more negative outcomes of not dealing with behavioral issues, they realize that this approach of not dealing is ineffective. So in other words, the caregiver coach is having that caregiver and helping them to do this, list the pros and cons of not dealing with the behavior, of avoiding the behavior. And there usually are more negative outcomes of avoiding the behavior than dealing with the behavior. There are also mind tricks that our mind plays on us. It's like an all or nothing thinking, like I've got to do it all or I can't be there. Sometimes we have a negative filter and we label ourselves. Sometimes we think I should rather than I can or I could. And sometimes it's like fortune telling or mind reading. We encourage our coaches and we encourage our caregivers to replace those negative thoughts with positive thoughts. So let's move on to the next step in the problem-solving process, which is creativity. Creativity is generating alternatives, helping those caregivers get out of their problem-solving rut. Because sometimes caregivers can get stuck when they're trying to solve a problem. Because one, they're trying to struggle to find the perfect solution, or they tend to grab at the very first idea that comes to mind only to have it fail for lack of thinking it through. We want our military caregivers to have creativity. And creativity is a critical technique to open the caregiver to explore possible alternative solutions. We tell our coaches, don't tell the caregiver what they should do. If they become stuck and ask them for guidance, the caregiver coach is going to share ideas that other caregivers have used that were successful to help stimulate them. So with brainstorming, the caregiver is instructed to think of as many solutions as possible and write down each one on a worksheet. All judgment is suspended. In other words, there's no calling it out as wrong or right. The caregiver is encouraged to be as specific and concrete as possible, and the more possible solutions, the more optimism. Understanding. In understanding, this is the U in the focus model approach for problem solving. In this step, the caregiver integrates all the information gathered and considers all possible solutions. They look at the pros and the cons of each solution. They look at the impact of each solution from all angles. One angle is personal and social consequences. Another may be short-term and long-term consequences. The likelihood that the solution will solve the problem, and also the likelihood that you can realistically carry out the solution. So we have a form that we use, that the coaches use with the families to kind of look at a worksheet, if you will. So let's look at an example together of how this might work. So you can see on the worksheet that the goal that the caregiver said that they would like to achieve was to try and be more patient with her husband and not let him get her so upset. So then the caregiver coach had her brainstorm. Okay, what are possible solutions to that? How can this situation be different? And so the caregiver came up with 3 possible solutions. one of them was to try to be in a good mood before she got to him, before she approached him. Another possible solution was to help, that would help her be more patient, was to treat herself to a bubble bath. And yet another one was to tell him to do it himself, because it might be that her husband was asking her to do things and it made her impatient. So let's go back. So during this worksheet, the caregiver coach would have them rate across various aspects, like we mentioned before: personal, social, short-term effects, long-term effects. Is it going to succeed? And can I do it? What's the likelihood of implementation? And they wanted them to rate it. In other words, a positive, a plus sign, would mean that it's generally positive consequences and very likely. A negative sign would mean that it's generally negative consequences as a result of this solution and not very likely. And a 0 would be neutral. So let's take a look at her possible solutions as this caregiver rated them. So one of the possible solutions was to try to be in a good mood before I get to him. So personally, this caregiver ranked that, oh yes, possibly that would result in positive consequences. Socially, it would probably work well socially between her and her husband. Short-term effects, she didn't think there would be any. Long-term effects, she felt like, yes, over the long term, and if I grew a habit out of this, it probably could work. Will it work? What is the likelihood of success? She gave it a plus. And can I do it? Can I make myself be in a good mood before I get to him? She thought, yes, I can do this. So she looked at the next solution. Treat herself to a bubble bath. Personally, she said that would be rewarding to her. That would be a positive personal effect. As far as social effects between her and her husband, that would give her a 0, because she didn't feel like that would really help their sociality between the two of them. Short-term effects, it probably wouldn't have any between her and her husband. Or long-term. Would it work to actually relax her some? It might. And did she think she would probably do it? This caregiver said no, because she doesn't have time for a bubble bath. So you can see how you go through each possible solutions and you analyze them and you rate them. And you do this, the caregiver coach does it with the caregiver. Okay, let's move on. The S in problem solving is for solve. So you're looking at the best solution that solves the problem or results in it being manageable, that maximizes the positive consequences that we just talked about, and minimizes the negative consequences. So in solving, the caregiver is coached in carrying out the selected solution. And sometimes the caregiving coaches will actually go through role playing, allow them to practice it with them so that when they get alone with their spouse, it's easier for them to carry it through. The caregiver is expected to evaluate the effectiveness of the chosen solution, how it affected all the parties involved, and determine how closely the solution brought about the experienced results. And then at the next session, the caregiver is expected to give feedback to the caregiver coach and share with them about how it worked, and they will discuss it and they will make adjustments as indicated in their next session. So now we've gotten through week 4. Week 5 through 7, we have a telephone call which serves to motivate the caregiver. They review the focus model and the components of that. They look at the solutions that they've already brainstormed about, and then they assess again. Week 8 through 10 involves a home or a Skype visit. Remember, it can be face-to-face. Many of our caregiver coaches actually go to the home. Sometimes they will meet them at a public place like Starbucks and have their visit. Others would like it to be by computer via Skype. Again, they motivate the caregiver, they look at the focus model, they discuss the problem orientation, and on this visit, they introduce stress management. We know that with stress management, self-care is very important, because the healthiest way to care for another is to care for yourself. Because if you don't care for yourself, you won't be there in the long haul to care for your loved one. So let's talk about some of the common effects and signs of stress. Physically, one could have high blood pressure, heart problems, increased susceptibility to colds and flu. Psychologically, they could have depression, anxiety, anger, irritability, lack of energy, hopelessness, helplessness, and crying, or they could feel completely exhausted and just empty. Stress socially causes friendships and relationships to suffer, and loneliness, and they feel like they don't have much support. There's another component. What happens with stress is secondary post-traumatic stress disorder. Secondary post-PTSD, we call it, is not a disorder that is recognized by the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. However, if you live with someone who does suffer from PTSD, you may notice yourself beginning to mirror or take on some of their same behaviors. And caregivers themselves, after watching their loved one suffer through this, they themselves may become watchful and anxious, have nightmares, and have fear. Identifying the issues are important. One of the things with stress is you can use a stress diary to track issues that are bothering you as well as your negative thoughts. You can seek to identify what triggered that feeling. You can work on avoiding or stopping negative thought patterns from spiraling out of control. Accepting the impact. A family that is adjusting to a post-combat, post-PTSD world is experiencing a crisis. It's not pretty, it's not nice, and it may zap their physical and mental strength like nothing they've ever experienced before. So that might mean that their house is messy, the dishes don't get cleaned up right after a meal, that they're not great at returning calls, remembering birthdays. So we need to tell our caregivers, give yourself permission to be less than perfect for a while. It's really okay. Learn mood management techniques and fake it till you make it. There are certain strategies that our caregiver coaches employ. One of them is a signal breath. Let's go over what a signal breath is together. A signal breath is you sit straight and tall or stand up and you breathe in. A deep breath when you're having that stressful, anxious feeling, and then you breathe out slowly. And as you're breathing out, repeat a word that's comforting to you. It might be relax, relax, relax. And as you do, you can just feel your shoulders relaxing, your arms becoming limp. And the signal breath just helps one to calm down. Another solution to reacting to stress is music and guided imagery. With soft music playing in the background, imagine a pleasant place, a positive activity. There are other activities, other solutions that work for these caregivers: stretching, yoga, meditation, and then we call one pleasant events. Think about what you really like doing: riding a bike, snow skiing. Replace those negative thoughts with positive thoughts. Moving on to weeks 11 through 12, there's another telephone call. Again, we're motivating the caregiver and reviewing the focus model, doing the assessment. And week 13 through 15, we have another home visit and Skype visit. Getting back in touch, having that face-to-face time with that caregiver is very important. Safety issues are discussed. We talk about suicide awareness and safety. Although this was not part of the original OFC protocol, with suicides occurring with almost 22 per day with our military veterans, we felt like this was an important part to include in our training and education. So with this training, they train the military caregivers in awareness of what suicide could be and how to prevent it. The caregivers learn to recognize early warning signs in their loved one. They're giving resources to help them better understand and how to respond in crisis situations. They help them to develop an action safety plan. It's called ACE, A-C-E, Ask, Care, Escort. So when you ask your family member, and you do have to tell your caregivers, you do have to have the courage to ask these questions, but when you do it directly and calmly. Are you thinking of killing yourself? Do you have a plan? How can I help? C, care. Care for your family member. Calmly control the situation. Listen patiently and express care and concern, and remove any means from the house that could be used for self-injury. And E, for the ACE acronym, stands for escort. Escort your family member and help them get treatment as soon as possible. Never leave your loved one alone, and if they're on the phone, keep them on the phone while you get help. Escort them to the emergency room or a clinic, and contact their chain of command, their chaplain, a behavioral health professional, or maybe a primary care provider. Maybe call 911. We have what's called a veteran crisis line, and that's what you see on this slide. And when they call that, they don't get a recording. They always get a live voice, someone to talk to. We also talk about safety with our caregiving coaches. We want them to understand that when they go into a home that someone is dealing with post-traumatic stress disorder, they may feel a little uncertain. We teach them to go with their gut feelings and their reactions. If they're uncertain, it's time to reconsider that visit, to get out of that home, or maybe take it out of that home into a more public place. In week 16 to 18, another telephone call is made, followed with the final week, and there is another visit face-to-face. And during this final visit is the time when the caregiver goes back online and is encouraged by the coach to complete all of their program in data. They're going back and talking about how they feel about their stress and their burden and their depression and their health complaints. And all of this is part of the post-data collection, which enables us to then analyze confidentially how the impact of the program is working. So I want to thank you for this time with you today. We do reward each of our caregivers that participate in the program and complete the program. They receive a challenge coin. We are so proud of them for reaching out for help and finding creative ways to show the strength by reaching out and grasping Operation Family Caregiver. Thank you.